Hey everybody, this is the progress report for the first Wednesday in November. Just now, 6 days away from the big midterm elections coming up on Tuesday. I hope you're all going to vote. And because it is the first Wednesday of the month, I would normally turn this way and say, hello, Lou D'Alessandro, Senator Lou, glad to have you with us. And I expected him to be with me tonight, but he told me that he's still dealing with some issues after his surgery, and he did not feel like he was able to come in, and I said, that's fine, Lou, but I believe he will call us and join us. So I'm looking forward to that. And here we are, and this is our last show before we get actually to voting on November 8th here in across the state of New Hampshire, and of course here in Manchester too. And I sure hope we're going to have a huge turnout. And I say that with a little bit of concern because I am a poll worker for the first time. I actually ran for selectman. How did I get talked into that? Oh, thank you, Carol. But I got talked into that. So I can't think of a more important topic and a more appropriate person to discuss that topic with than the issue of voting and whether we are really have any reason to be concerned about the legitimacy, transparency, fairness, and objectivity of our voting operations in the state of New Hampshire. And in spite of the fact that there is really nothing to indicate that New Hampshire elections are anything but those things, there is a serious issue of concern on the part of some voters, and maybe people who don't vote, even more important perhaps, that our elections are somehow suspect. And to that end, some time ago, our new Secretary of State, former Deputy Secretary of State, Dave Scanlan, decided it would be a good idea to have a select committee on voter confidence. And to do that, he turned to two of the best people to chair that commission, one of whom I'm very pleased to say is here with me today, Attorney Brad Cook of Sheehan Phinney, and longtime chairman of the New Hampshire Ballot Law Commission. We could talk a little bit about what they do. It's a very important job. It has one side benefit. Every time somebody calls up and asks Brad Cook for a campaign contribution, he says, I can't help you. I have a job. I have a job ensuring the integrity of our elections. That's one benefit of that job. And I know because I did it. And I got the answer more than once.
It's worth a lot of money.
But more important than that, Secretary of State Scanlan, when he was deciding that we should have a select committee on voter confidence, he turned to Brad Cook, which could not have been a better choice. And also on the other side of the aisle, because Brad is still a Republican, at least in registration, and called upon our good friend Dick Sweat, who's been a congressman and a candidate for senator. I think he was senator for about 30 minutes one time when the exit polls called the election for him, and then it turned out that they were wrong, that's the only time that happened. So here we are, and we're just a few days away from the election. I can't think of an election that's been more hard fought around the country, and certainly here in the state of New Hampshire at all levels. The federal offices, Senator Maggie Hassan versus Bolduc, Chris Pappas versus Caroline Leavitt, and Andy Custer versus Bob Burns. They are really if you haven't seen TV ads to the point where you want to scream at them, you're probably living in a rock and examining the ice melt in Greenland or something. In any event, Brad, thank you for coming in and joining me, and I'm just delighted you do it. You're a busy guy, and I really appreciate your joining us here.
Bob, it's nice to be here. Thank you.
I'd like to say a little bit more about Brad Cook. I've known Brad a long time. And Brad, one of the things I first remember reading you about in the Union Leader was when you were delivering the valedictorian address at the University of New Hampshire for your class. And those were the days when some Bill Loeb was running that paper and spitting vitriol in his front page ads. And you used your occasion, your valedictory address, to kind of take aim at him for his wanton cruelty, and and I've never forgotten it. And that was a long time ago, Brad, when you were a graduate at UNH.
It was December of 1974. Actually, it was a graduation address.
A graduation address.
Yeah, because I had graduated in 1970, And then my wife and I were on our honeymoon in England, and we came back, and I was going through all my mail right across the street here. And I got to some letter from the president of the university, and I read it and kept going. And about 10 minutes later, I said, what did that letter say? Because I thought it was saying, well, you're invited to graduation. It said, you're invited to graduation to be the speaker. And I said, holy Toledo, what's that about? And so I did talk about Mr. Loeb and in not terribly complimentary terms. And he wrote an interesting editorial called Cook's Christmas Hate-In, because it was 4 days before Christmas. And it was classic Loeb. I had a tassel on my hat, and he got me with the cross eyes looking at the tassel, right at the head of the editorial. But having read about Mr. Loeb's failures this year and the union leader, and the union leader saying they would never put his name in that paper again, it was sort of that we'd come full circle.
I certainly was absolutely struck by that, and my phrase was better late than never. I think they should have done that after Kevin Cash wrote his tell-all book about William Loeb many years ago, but they got there. And that makes me think, Brad, maybe you'd like to join me. I think we should go to the City Fathers and say it's time to rename Loeb Plaza and Loeb Drive too. I don't understand why
I'd settle for Joe McQuaid Drive.
I would too, actually.
Absolutely.
Brendan McQuaid, if he wants
Well,
that.
whatever.
Well, in any event, here we are, and Brad and Brad's going to discuss with me and all of you the work of the Select Committee on Voter Confidence, why it exists, and because they're pretty close to the end of their process, if what I'm reading is correct. They've had hearings, and they're going to be releasing recommendations in the not distant future. I just thought I'd quickly put out what the mission of the commission is as set forth in the Secretary of State's website. The Special Committee on Voter Confidence will work to identify root causes of voter confidence decline and make recommendations to reverse the trend. So that's the charge you had. And why don't you tell us a little bit about the commission? I know it's very much bipartisan, not just between you and your co-chair, but the rest of the membership. But tell us a little bit about the commission.
Well, the committee was established by Dave Scanlan in the spring, as you said, after he was appointed to replace Bill Gardner as Secretary of State. And the question at the outset was, what do we need it for? And there was a good deal of thought that people really didn't lack confidence in elections in New Hampshire, and if you had a committee that went around for a long period of time, wouldn't it just give everybody with a complaint the opportunity to come and complain? And we discussed that, and Dave was clear that letting people have an opportunity to express themselves never hurts, and pointing out and having an opportunity to point out what the strengths are never hurt, and we really could have an opportunity to vet the whole process. And we do have a committee of 8 people. There's Dick and me. There's Jim Splain, former representative and senator from Portsmouth. Amanda Merrill, former state senator from Durham.
Very capable person.
We have Andrew Georgitis from Concord, who's the Concord Republican city chairman and a nice young man. We've got Olivia Zink from Open Democracy. Mm-hmm. We've got a guy named Ken Eiler from Windham, who's been a skeptic about elections and very involved in looking into.
Ken Weiler, did you say that?
No, Eiler.
Oh, Eiler, okay.
Yeah, not Weiler.
No, Weiler's a different
Ken
person.
Weiler's a different guy. Doug Teschner, who worked in the Secretary of State's office and has been a rep and done different things. And it's a good group, and we've had a good time. I'm just trying to make sure I didn't leave. Ring is actually Ken's name. And it's been an interesting group. We've worked together well. We've had meetings in Portsmouth, in Berlin, in Laconia, in Keene, in Nashua, several in Concord, and given people a chance to come. Each meeting we've had has had one substantive portion or an invited guest to come. Andy Smith came and told us about what polling shows. We've had Dartmouth professors. We've had MIT professors. We've had people just explaining the workings of mechanical voting tabulating devices, commonly known as voting machines. Mm-hmm. We've had, every hearing's had an opportunity for the public. We've had 270 different people come. We had 2 sessions when local officials could come and explain how it works.
So the public has turned out?
And the people have come. And we've had people who had some rather interesting ideas. But we've had an overwhelming, I would say, if we add them up, we've had overwhelming expressions of support. And then we've received a lot of written testimony by email and other written communications. And almost overwhelmingly, people have expressed confidence in New Hampshire elections. And there are several reasons for that. The primary one is our elections are run by our people. You're an election official.
Indeed.
You've been a candidate, you're an official. You walk into your polling place. I vote in Ward 1 in Manchester. I walk into the polling place. I have to produce my ID to my next door neighbor.
Yeah.
Now, she's pretty sure she knows who I am.
Yeah, I know. I'm not sure we really need that.
But she checks
maybe we
it.
do.
Well, but she follows along. She checks it.
Yeah, sure.
And then I know Jim Townsend's standing there, and then I know who else is there, and it's a social event as well as an election event.
Yeah.
But how are you not going to have confidence in your friends and neighbors running the elections? And that's true all over the state of New Hampshire. We're not like some states, and our report is not aimed at what's wrong with Michigan and what's wrong with Georgia and what's wrong with Florida. Our report's focusing on New Hampshire and New Hampshire elections. And we've had a wonderful opportunity to really figure out what's right about it. And I think our report's going to show what's right about it. I started out by saying we're not going to weigh these things. If we have 100 people say we don't like our elections because of X, Y, and Z, and we have 80 people that say we like them, we're not going to say our elections must be bad because 100 people said we don't like them. You can hear a bad idea 100 times, that doesn't make it a good idea. And you can hear a good idea once, and it makes it a good idea.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, the truth is not a popularity contest.
Yeah, yeah. Was it hard for you to decide to accept this assignment? I asked that because, to me, and we were discussing this briefly, if there's an issue with voter confidence in New Hampshire, it's hard for me to see how it's anything other than the election denials resulting from the 2020 election, starting with the former president who refused to accept the results. If I had to say, why is there a lack of confidence in New Hampshire elections, I'd say it comes from the national scene, and for the first time in American history, a candidate for president who was legitimately defeated in the election, both in the overwhelming in the popular vote and by a sufficient margin in the electoral vote, refused to accept the results.
Well, there are 2 thoughts floating around there. The first question was it hard for me to accept it, the assignment? No, it was not hard. And the reason is this. I think you're right, that the primary reason we're still talking about this subject is because former President Trump continues to act like he doesn't believe he lost the election. Now, President Trump's not a stupid man, and I think he probably knows he lost the election.
He knows. I think this.
But he keeps saying it and saying it and saying it. So that's not the problem. And the problem isn't those few people that may have come to us who are absolutely convinced that he had the election stolen from him. The problem is people who keep saying that are going to affect a lot of other people. And 2 things are going to happen from that. They're either going to doubt the validity of elections, or they're not going to vote. In either case, that's detrimental. And so what our committee's not trying to win over Donald Trump and say, Donald Trump, you really ought to understand that New Hampshire elections are good. I don't care if he thinks they're good or bad. I care about what the people who may have been listening to him and may be confused think.
Yeah.
And if we can persuade them that things are okay, that's the job. It's not the minuscule people who actually might believe it.
How close is your committee completed its public hearings at this point?
Yes.
So presumably we aren't too far away from a committee report with recommendations. Is that right?
We're going to have a report. There was a fundamental question that Secretary Scanlan had to answer, not us, on when the report was going to come out. And obviously the answer to that was either before or after the election. Those are the 2
the answer
choices.
is now it's going to be after the election.
And it's going to be after the election because we weren't finished, and we might have been able to finish yesterday when we had a meeting. But if we'd rushed it and then come out with a report on this Friday, let's say, it would have been either lost in the advertising shuffle
or
or it would
suspect.
have been confusing.
Yeah, suspect maybe.
And-
I don't think there's any question that, I don't question at all the desire to postpone this report, or maybe it was just the way it worked out, to have it come up after the election results, when that'll swamp everything.
And, hopefully, one of the things that happened during our period of the report was the September primaries, which were flawless. The Ballot Law Commission had no business out of that primary.
Really?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Zero. There weren't any recounts that were challenged. There were only 7 recounts from the whole
And
state of New
everyone
Hampshire.
affirmed, and everyone
Every one of
affirmed
them affirmed the
the
result.
result. Yeah.
And in every case, the winners and the losers accepted the results.
Yeah.
So there was nothing for the Ballot Law Commission to do. And that's how good the elections were in September. Now, primaries are easier than general elections.
Oh, yeah.
And, the nightmare that keeps me up at night as chairman of the Ballot Law Commission is Wyman Durkin. I mean, I don't want Hassan Baldock to be within 14 votes,
Yeah.
because then you
Wyman
have to
Durkin, the closest Senate race in U.S. history, 10 votes.
Right.
Yeah.
And we don't want to recount a whole state.
No.
Thank you very much.
Recounts are a lot of work.
Yeah.
Anyhow, elections are a lot of work. I don't think people realize how hard people work, from the Secretary of State's office to our city clerk's office to the people that, get elected, or in most cases just volunteer to do this for nominal pay. I mean,
Well,
it's been
and-
quite a revelation to me about the amount of work it takes to pull off an election, the number of people that have to do it, and how
Well, New
hard they
Hampshire,
work.
Tennessee may be the volunteer state, but New Hampshire's a volunteer state.
Yeah, it
I mean,
certainly is.
and but the other people that work hard in elections and deserve our credit and our thanks are the people who stand for office,
Yeah,
because it's easy to support a candidate, and it's certainly easy to criticize one.
yeah.
But when it's your name on the ballot, and you've
Yeah,
done this a lot
oh,
of
yeah.
times, but when it's your name on the ballot,
Yeah.
there's no place to hide.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Do you think there's going to be significant recommendations for changes to our system when you file your report?
No.
Or you're going to say we have a good system, let's defend it?
Well, we have heard several themes in our hearings. A lot of people have pointed out human errors in the elections. So-and-so didn't get 3 signatures where you're supposed to have 3 signatures. Somebody didn't break the seal on this before they broke the seal on this. Somebody miscounted 4 votes over here. Somebody found three ballots that should have been put in a different pile.
Yeah.
Well, elections are human endeavors.
Yeah, they are.
And there's a lot of people involved, and there's a lot of steps involved, and there's a lot of process involved.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of mistakes,
Yeah.
but they're human mistakes, and they're almost entirely harmless error.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't affect the result. One of the key findings that we have is we have had 0 instances pointed out to us of any election in the history of New Hampshire that anybody can identify where the person who got the most votes didn't get elected. And what's an election for? At the end of the day, it's not for perfection.
Yeah.
I've never seen a perfect election. But it's to make sure that the candidate or the proposition on the ballot that gets the most support wins.
Yeah.
And that's what it's about.
When I was standing there at Ward 12 helping people feed their ballots into the machine, the scanning machine, more than one person came up and said, I don't trust that machine. Okay, sir. It was sir. You can put your ballot in here and it'll be hand counted. Well, I want to follow that, but we have a call. I bet this is Lou calling in. Hello, caller. Welcome to the Progress Report Live.
Well, thank you very much, Bob Backus, and obviously Bradford Cook, great guest. I think it's a great show. What a great time for this presentation with the election coming up.
Yep.
With all the nonsense that's spread over the country. New Hampshire, once again, will set the mark for doing the right thing at the right time for its population.
Yep.
And I must say to Brad that the people who work in the Secretary of State's office, Paula and Karen and all of the workers in the Secretary of State's office, do yeoman work every election. and cover themselves with glory for the job that they do.
And let's not forget the city clerk's office, too. I think the city clerk's office does a phenomenal job of helping the elections be good.
Absolutely. I think they just do super work. And, I'm sorry I can't be with you because there are a lot of things, Brad, that I'd like to talk to you about with regard to elections. I remember the Wyman-Durkin race, and I could remember a recount myself. I was involved in a recount, very significant recount, to be honest with you. You know, recounts, how they can get sticky.
Absolutely.
But I do believe that we do it as well, if not better, than any place in the country. We ought to take a great deal of pride in that because so many of our people are volunteers. So many are volunteers. And I think what's happening around the country where volunteer workers are being threatened, their lives are being threatened. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
It's despicable. Despicable.
Of reports today about Arizona where they're taking pictures of your license plate and taking pictures of you voting. Oh my goodness gracious!
Yeah.
Anyway, that's not New Hampshire, and Bradford Cook will keep it going along with his committee. And I'm very happy that he's with you tonight. And as always, Bob Backus. It's my honor to serve with you on the first Wednesday of the month, and I'll be there next Wednesday, next time for the first Wednesday of the month.
Well, I'll look forward to it, Lou. I'm sorry you can't join us. We understand it. And we know you're a candidate again to be elected to, you're the Dean of the Senate. You continue to be the Dean of the Senate, I hope. And you got a lot of fans.
Thank you.
Okay.
And again, Brad, thank you for your service.
Lou, it's good to talk to you. I hope you're feeling better.
Thank you, Brad. I'm really coming out of the woods in great shape. I had a great surgeon, and it's good to have all of these amenities here in Manchester and in the state of New Hampshire. But again, congratulations on your great work for the state, for the university system, and for Sheehan Phinney, Bassett Green. We can never forget our dearest friends that are no longer with us. Bill Green, Kim Zachis. So many wonderful people.
Well, I was telling Bob, Lou, that the first week that I worked at Sheehan Phinney in 1972, the second day or the third day, the first guy that came to see me was Lou D'Alessandro, and I've never forgotten it.
Yeah, really.
So,
really.
Thank you.
I mean,
it was great. You've done great work.
If there's ever been a good friend, it's you, Lou.
Yeah.
And we'll keep it going.
Yes.
Yeah, Lou,
you're just getting started, Lou.
Lou, thank you so much for calling in to join us. I can't wait for you to be back here.
Keep smiling and keep going.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, we will. Gee, I forgot to mention, Brad, and I should have, that you spent many years on the UNH Board of Trustees.
Well, no, I actually...
As a chairman, right?
No, I actually was never on the Board of Trustees. I was president of the Alumni Association.
Okay.
I was on the Alumni Board of Directors, but early in my career, I started representing private colleges, and I thought it might be an issue conflict if I was on the Board of Trustees.
Oh, okay. All right.
So,
there you go.
But
I stand corrected.
But I've been a
good service.
I went to my 50th reunion 2 years late this year, so.
Well, we were there.
You and Lou was there. We had lunch. It wasn't his 50th.
We were there.
It was not his 50th.
Anyway, thank you for everything. Thank you, Bob Backus. Keep the dream alive and well. And let's go, Cats. Saturday. We
Absolutely.
play Richmond in a very, very important football game.
All right, Lou.
Thank you, Lou.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, Lou.
You're welcome.
Well, I certainly hope we'll lose the best.
There's nobody going to keep Lou D'Alessandro down.
No, and he really wanted to be here today, so I know that for sure.
He's the dean of a lot of things.
He's the dean of a lot of things, and we've had our disagreements, but I love the guy, and I think he's a tremendous public service servant. So anyhow, I was talking about voting machines, and as I was saying, I was doing my part at Ward 12, feeding votes into the machine, and a couple of times a guy would come up to me and say, "I don't want anything going through that machine. I don't want anywhere near that machine." I said, "Okay, sir, you can put it in this place and it'll be hand counted." There's a real distrust of that technology among certain segments. Is that something that came up, and you're going to have any recommendations about how to deal with that?
Well, first of all, during the 2020 election, the former president made some assertions about a certain manufacturer's voting machines,
Dominion.
Dominion Manufacturing. We don't use Dominion machines. We use something called the AccuVote machine.
Yeah.
And the AccuVote machine's been around for a long time. And it meets the criteria that New Hampshire has set. It cannot be networked.
It's not connected to the internet.
It's not
anyway.
connected, can't be connected to the internet. In fact, it was developed before there was such a thing as the internet. It's got, the only wire coming out of it is the plug to plug it into the wall.
Yeah.
It gets programmed. The programs get, you've seen the process in the polls. The programs come in, they're secured, they're tested, the seals are broken. There's a test, ballots are put through the machine to make sure it's working.
Mm-hmm.
But the key thing, Bob, in New Hampshire, not true everywhere in the country, but every single voter in New Hampshire has a paper ballot.
That's right.
Whether you're using a machine to count it, and in 100 towns in New Hampshire, they don't use machines.
Yeah.
So they're all counted by hand. And studies show that machine counting is more accurate than hand counting.
Well, of course it is. There's such a thing as human error.
Because
I
at
don't
10:30 at
understand
night,
this.
at 10:30 at night, what happens to people?
Yeah.
They get tired.
They're fried.
Machines don't get tired.
They're fried.
And so it's more
Everybody's
accurate.
tired.
It's
Yeah.
more accurate to use the machine. Now, have there been issues with machines? Yes. And they're all tied to human error. So it's not the machines are accurate. But the backup is, if a particular machine went fluey, you take the paper ballots, you count them, you find out how the votes went.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a count of how many ballots you have before the election. And there's a reconciliation at the end of the night. If you had 1,000 ballots when you started, how do you accounted for 1,000 ballots? And so this whole idea that the machines don't work is out there with some people.
Mm-hmm.
But it's solely the result of misrepresentations about the machines that were part of the misrepresentations about how the election must have been stolen somehow.
Yeah.
You know, there must be a pony in there someplace. And it's just not so. We are in the process in New Hampshire at the Ballot Law Commission of having to identify the next generation of machines, because the AccuVote machines have been around for a long time.
Yeah, again, tough to get parts, I guess.
And the supporting corporation that services them has indicated it won't service them after the 2024 election. So we have to replace them. So we're going through a process now, and in next week's election, in 3 different towns, an alternate ballot counting device is going to be used.
Sort of a test.
Ashland, Woodstock, and Newington are going to use a device that has something called open source software from a company called VotingWorks. And open source software has an advantage that anybody can look up the source codes of the software on the internet and figure out how this stuff works. So it's not some kind of secret. And that's attractive.
Yeah, that might help voter confidence.
There are
maybe.
several, and there are several other manufacturers who've come to us and asked for their devices to be tested.
Yeah.
So sometime between now and 2024, the towns and cities are going to have the opportunity to select among replacement machines, and the Ballot Law Commission has set a set of criteria that have to be met for any machine to be used in New Hampshire.
That's part of your jurisdiction?
Yes, the Ballot Law Commission
Has to approve the machines.
approves the machines.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. You know, I was reading about the results of the election in Brazil, one of the largest democracies in the world, and they just had a huge election, a very significant election. And I was interested to see in the Times account of that they use voting machines that don't have paper ballots.
Right.
I was astonished by that, because I remember several years ago there was a suggestion that should be what we do in New Hampshire as well, do away with the paper ballots. And there was, I think, a properly justified objection to that. We want to have those paper ballots so we can check things.
We had,
But it was surprising to me that a vast country like Brazil, the largest country in South America,
well,
does his votes with no
a lot of
backup.
states, and a lot of devices a lot of devices create ballots. So in other words, you walk into the
Yeah.
polling place, you cast your ballot on the machine then prints a ballot,
Yeah.
creates a ballot, so you haven't marked it,
Yeah.
and gives it to you. And then you check it to make sure it's what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
And then you have it with you. We won't even allow that.
Well, isn't that what we do with our voter assistance?
Yes, that's
computers?
the exception.
Yeah. Yeah.
Voter
okay.
assistance, people with disabilities, under the American
That's
with Disabilities
exactly what happens
Act.
with them. Yeah.
That's how that one works. But we did years ago. I was on the Ballot Law Commission previously in the 1980s, and we did away with the hanging chad machine.
Oh yeah.
And we did away with the. You may remember we had one election in Manchester years ago when you could walk in and look at a kind of soft plastic thing and press a button and a light would light up.
I don't remember that.
That
but I'll
recorded.
take
That
your word
lasted
for it.
one election.
Yeah.
We did away with them because when I was a kid in New Jersey, I remember going in the polling place with my mother, and it was a big mechanical machine, and she would look up at the machine and she'd go click, click.
Oh yeah.
And in the back,
Yeah.
it was like a odometer.
Yeah.
And it would advance one, and all you had to say was, and Joe Jones might be back there clicking it a few more times. You know, and so
Let's see. Secretary of State Scanlan set up you and Dick as the co-chairs of this committee. You've had your hearings. You're going to be releasing a report. Do you think you're going to? Well, I guess you can't tell me now because the report's not done yet. But or is it? Maybe I don't know. Can we expect any big changes to be recommended in your report or not? Or
No.
What can you say about that?
well, two things. We were not asked to redesign the election system of New Hampshire. We were asked to identify why people should or should not have confidence in the system that we have.
Yeah.
It's the legislature that designs the system.
Yeah.
The Ballot Law Commission, which I serve on, is a creature of the legislature. We interpret and carry out the laws that the legislature passes.
Yeah.
We don't have to like them, we just have to enforce them.
Yeah.
And likewise, Dave didn't say to us, tell us what the system ought to look like.
Yeah.
He said, tell us whether we should have confidence or no confidence in the system we have.
Yeah.
So a lot of people have come to us, League of Women Voters. It's kind of funny. You can tell what groups met the night before you get a bunch of stuff. Because and I always say, well, League of Women Voters must have had and that's a fine organization. But you could say,
is.
but they must have had a meeting last night because you get 100 emails and the third paragraph will start the same in each one of the emails.
Yeah.
And they are advocating for some fundamental changes. They want things like online registration or no excuse absentee voting,
Yeah.
which, by the way, would take a change in our state constitution because absentee ballot criteria are in our constitution.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's a good point.
So everybody who says, oh, everybody ought to be able to vote absentee, well, you
Yeah.
have to change the constitution to do that. But that's not our job. We're not saying, and we heard a lot of testimony about independent commissions doing districting, which I happen to think is a good idea. But that's not our job.
Yeah, we had that bill and it was vetoed.
Yeah, but online registration isn't our job.
Yeah.
Our job is to look at the system we have and say, are there things about this system that could be fixed and made better? One recommendation that came out of the experience of the state in 2020, when I was chairman of a committee to how to vote in a pandemic. And we suggested all sorts of things that resulted in a pretty good turnout in 2020 when we were worried that people would stay home. And one of the things we recommended and was implemented that year only was pre-processing absentee ballots.
Yeah.
Opening the outer envelope, getting them ready, checking the checklist off, getting ready to count them.
Yeah.
Well, that worked. So one of our recommendations is legislature ought to consider whether that shouldn't be made permanent.
Why not? Might speed up the results.
And that's something we've heard about.
Yeah.
It's not a partisan thing one way or another, but it's just an improvement that would make the system work better.
Yeah.
One of the things Bill Gardner testified in front of us a couple weeks ago. And he came in because there was a report in the New York Times about a academic report put out by some university in Illinois, with 3 professors, 2 from Illinois and 1 from China, a well-known hotbed of democracy, where they said New Hampshire was the hardest place in the country to vote, hardest, out of 50.
Yeah.
And Bill came and said the criteria for this was how easy it is for 16-year-olds to pre-register, whether felons could register while they were incarcerated, could vote while they were incarcerated, and a bunch of other stuff like that. When in fact, New Hampshire, from the last 4 presidential elections, been in the top 3 of turnout.
Yeah.
We have same-day registration, and in fact, polls say by voters, it's so easy to vote in New Hampshire. We're probably the easiest place in the country to vote.
Well, except places like, I guess, Oregon, where everybody can vote by mail.
When Oregon went to vote by mail, their turnout went down,
That's what Bill
and
Gardner told me.
their confidence went down.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what you heard from people, but I thought during the pandemic election, 2020, when there were enormous efforts to allow people to vote remotely,
Right.
by mail or, drop boxes and all these things, that created a lot of suspicion, I think. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But Bill Gardner, I used to debate these things with him and say, well, why don't we have, no excuse absentee ballot voting? I don't know whether your committee is going to weigh in on that issue. But his point was, as I recall it, well, I think, voting is such an important part of citizenship that it should be, at least to some extent, a communal affair where you go and gather with your fellow citizens and exercise this fundamental right of democracy. It kind of diminishes it. This is his argument. If you can just do it all remotely without interacting with your fellow citizens, even by walking through the gauntlet of candidates waving signs at you. What do you think about that?
Well, I agree with Bill. But understand, we have one of the beauties of America is we have 50 different states. And we don't have a South Bronx or Brooklyn or downtown Atlanta in New Hampshire. And we don't have the same circumstances a lot of states have. So let them design their system for them. In New Hampshire, where we have community activities called polling places, where we have relatively small numbers in each place. The biggest polling place in New Hampshire
Derry.
is Derry this year because they only have 1 polling place.
Yes.
But last year when they had 3 in Derry, it was Bedford.
Oh, really?
But much bigger than any of the Manchester wards.
Yeah.
Because they have everybody in a very large town voting in one place.
Yeah.
And you go into Bedford High School or Wyndham High School, where I went during the primary,
Yeah.
and you look at the size of the polling place compared to the Webster School gym where I vote. It's huge. It's huge. Immense. But my point is, our system fits the people of New Hampshire well because we take it seriously. We take the time, we go, we get a record turnout. We're always in the top 10 in the country. No matter, we're higher than Oregon every time. I mean, people get, what happens in Oregon? People get the ballot in the mail they think is junk mail and they throw it out.
Yeah.
They do. They do.
I can see where that would happen
They do.
pretty easily.
And so,
Yeah.
it's our system works for us. I'm not here to prescribe how New York ought to do it, or how Georgia ought to do it, or how California ought to do it. But for New Hampshire, our system works. It's deserving of the people's confidence. It's administered by the people. It's accurate, and it comes up with the winners win, losers lose.
Yeah.
And heaven help us if we have too many recounts.
I've always believed, Brad, and I'm sure you probably would agree with me on this too, the scandal in New Hampshire at least, well, I think it's true across the country, is not that votes, there's batches of fraudulent votes. I just don't think that's a reality at all, no matter how much our former president claims it and his minions. But the fact that not enough people vote. This is not probably part of the charge of your committee, but I'm wondering, is that something that you think about? And particularly and most distressingly, young people don't vote in the numbers that they should to protect their own interests. I don't get it.
I've 2 things about that. There's a great old political science argument that you play out in your head. Is it better that everybody votes no matter how uninformed they are? Or is it better that only those people who familiarize themselves with the issues and the candidates and are educated vote?
Oh, I think we've already passed on that. We let people with mental illness vote.
We let everybody vote.
We let everybody
So
vote.
the answer is we want as many people to get as educated and vote intelligently
Yeah.
as possible.
Yeah.
Now, I agree. If we think we're doing fabulously because we have a 72% turnout, and we do, because we're in the top 10, that means we're getting a C minus if it was a test.
Right.
Okay? So how do you increase the turnout?
yeah,
And how can our committee contribute to that?
Yeah.
Our committee can contribute to it by saying two things to people. One, it's easy to vote. It's not an intimidating process. You can go do it easily. It's not going to screw up your whole day, number one. And number two, when you vote, it's going to be secure and your vote's going to count.
Yeah.
And the more that message gets out to people, the higher the turnout will be.
Yeah.
Now, there's some other factors. It's really nice when you have the best candidates you ever saw on the ballot. I mean, this year, for example, I won't denigrate any of the other offices, but we have two people running for governor where it's one of those rare and wonderful times. It's picking the better of two candidates.
Yes, it is.
And I got to know Tom Sherman in the 2020 committee because he was on it, although I never met him in person until this fall. And he's one of the most magnificent, thoughtful, responsible guys I've ever seen in my life. Democratic candidate. Governor Sununu's done a good job. Now, I can argue with him on certain issues and certain things, and for sure, and nobody's perfect. But Chris Sununu's done a good job. And there's no reason for me not, as a Republican, not to vote for Chris Sununu. But I keep thinking, what a fine guy Tom Sherman is. Well, that's the kind of problem to have.
That's the kind of problem.
When I look at the rest of the ballot, I don't have that problem too
Yeah.
often.
Yeah. And my canvassing that I've done certainly backs up what you're saying. I went to houses that were very pro-democratic, and the only time I ever heard a dissent, well, I might vote for Sununu. It would be Democrats all the way down except for that.
You know, one of the things that's happened in politics, back in 1980 when my law partner Warren Rudman ran for the Senate,
Yeah.
we went to every household and asked people to vote for Warren Rudman. We went to Democratic wards in Manchester where they had never thought of voting Republican.
Yeah.
But we went to everybody. What's happening today? People come down my street and they don't come to my house.
No.
They don't leave a thing. And I said, come over here.
Yeah.
You know, what are you doing?
Yeah.
They said, well, we have a list. The computer said I go to that house and that house and that
Yeah,
house.
that's what they do.
Because those are the Democrats.
Yeah.
And I said, well, my wife's an independent.
Yeah.
You should go there. Oh, yeah, she is. Well, we'll go there. I said, well, you don't want me to vote for your candidate? Well, the computer didn't tell me to go talk to you. And that's crazy.
I think it's kind of crazy too. And when I was campaigning, I always made a point, whatever my list's off, I saw somebody outside in the yard,
I mean,
I went to talk to them.
what, my vote's no good?
Yeah. You know, some countries, I think Australia's one, have an actual legal requirement that if you're a citizen, you have to vote.
Several countries do.
And Barack Obama, I think, once suggested that when he was president. I'd just be interested in your thoughts on that.
I don't
think
think
it's
I think it's idealistic. I think it would be hard to enforce, and I'm not sure I want people that I have to force vote to vote.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't know. I think the real scandal is that we don't have more people vote in this country. Not so much in New Hampshire, but even in New Hampshire, a really extraordinary turnout is what you said, like 72%.
Yep,
Yeah,
big
as
time.
you said, that's a C. Yeah. Let's see. As I say, a lot of people seem to. Well, I don't know how many, but I saw a story in the paper the other day that certain people or groups are going to recommend don't trust the machines. Insist your vote be hand counted.
Well, in the primary, you can force your vote to be hand counted
Yes.
because I really shouldn't be telling people how to do this. But if you look
Write
at
in.
governor and you see Chris Sununu and Tom Sherman, and then write in, and you write in Tom Sherman, even though he's right there printed.
Yeah.
that vote is going to be hand counted.
Yeah.
And a lot of people in the primary did that to force their ballots to be hand counted
Yeah.
because they didn't trust the voting machine.
Yeah.
It's silly.
It's silly.
It's impractical. It puts a great burden on the election officials.
Certainly
People
does.
shouldn't do it because it's not accurate.
Yeah.
But if somebody really wanted their ballot to be, I mean, I did it inadvertently
Yeah.
because there was an office where nobody was running, and I wrote in one of my friends.
Yeah.
And then I found out later that I screwed up the process.
Yeah. Well, I certainly hope, and I guess I can ever confidence that this won't happen, that your recommendation is not going to be hand counting all ballots.
That's safe to say.
Safe to say.
That's safe to say.
I would quit if I had to do that.
That's safe to say.
My job at Ward 12.
And it's fun to watch. You know, it's fun to. It was used to be fun to watch Neil Tillotson at the Balsams
Yeah.
count the 4 votes or the
Yeah,
5 votes.
yeah.
That was fun.
It was fun, yeah.
But that's
Made
easy.
good TV, yeah.
And and as I say,
Yeah.
people don't have to have machines in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
That's local option.
Yeah.
But all our cities have them.
Yeah.
And remember last fall or last spring at town meeting in 12 or 13 towns, they had it on the ballot whether to get rid of their machines, and they all kept them.
Yeah. You know, one of the things, and you kind of adverted to this earlier on, is that the election day is a very, very stressful day for poll workers. Well, for lots of people, but especially for poll workers. You have to get there at 5. You have 13 hours of voting, and then you have to deal with the counting of the vote afterwards. And by the time it gets up to 9, 10, and probably in this midterm election with a bigger turnout, it'll probably be later than that, people are pretty fried.
Yep.
And it strikes me that is there some way we could, I don't know whether your committee will have anything to suggest about that we can do that? Could there be a backup personnel provided? Is a system recruiting the people it needs to handle its job as well as it should be?
Well, a couple of our recommendations go to recruiting poll workers and training, because especially with I don't think we've seen it in New Hampshire much, but the reports across the country of intimidation of poll workers,
Yeah.
and we do have a recommendation on that, and there's a law on that already in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
But with the criticism and intimidation, and just the aging, the average poll worker is older than the average citizen.
Yeah.
We need
And
to
our citizens are pretty old overall, too.
and we need to continuously refresh the process.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we need to be recruiting new people.
Yeah.
We need to be training them well so that the inadvertent mistakes don't happen.
Yeah.
Because if we start having this system run by a state bureaucracy as opposed to our friends and neighbors,
Yeah.
it's going to lose a lot of its flavor.
It's going to lose a lot. Yeah, it certainly will. You know, in New Hampshire, we have a requirement that every 4th grader goes up to the State House for a tour of the State House. And boy, that's changed some people's lives in a major way. I think of my late, lamented, lost friend, Rennie Cushing, who went there as a 4th grader and just fell in love with the place. And what a wonderful career he had.
He did.
Just a magnificent person. And maybe we should have school children attend part of an election process, or maybe we need to be doing more to teach
the whole effort,
civics in schools again.
The whole effort of civics education.
Yeah.
You know, I got my civics education at home. My parents talked about elections. They talked about
Well, that's the
public
best place
policy.
to get it, but a lot of people aren't going to get it
Well, I
that
know,
way.
and that's a shame.
Yeah.
But you know, you can't force feed this stuff, but you can expose people to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, John Lynch thought the best part of his job was talking to 4th graders.
Yeah, you love to do it. And I love to take the kids on the tours. I came up
great.
from Manchester. It was great fun to do that. A lot of fun, and they're so exciting, yeah. Let's see, what else have I got here I wanted to talk to you about? Let's see. I think we talked about the problem, the young voters turning out in such low numbers, which I just think that is distressing. I like to say, you know, the reason Social Security is considered the third rail of politics is because senior citizens turn out and strength to
That's
vote.
right.
The reason student debt's a huge problem in this country is because young people don't turn out to vote, is my guess.
That may be, and there may be other reasons for student debt problems.
Yeah. Well, I think the Congress would have addressed it before this if they had to fear the young voters as much as they fear the senior citizens.
I think the Congress making too much money
Yeah,
available
yeah,
to colleges made the price go up too high.
Yeah. We talked about stress on election workers. Let's see. Can you tell me anything else about what you think? Well, first of all, when do you expect your recommendations are going to be out? And how much of a report is it going to be? And you think?
Well, I think the report's
do you think
probably-
you think you'll have unanimous consent to what you recommend?
Well, there's a lot of questions there. Our last meeting, I think, is going to be on the 16th. We'll probably have a report thereafter. It'll probably be around 10 pages long.
Oh, that's pretty good.
And so far, as I can tell, we have a consensus report that everybody's backing. We've tried to do that, but we'll see when there's a final vote on it whether we do or not.
Okay, very good.
Now, going back to the young people,
Yeah.
I have 3 kids. None of them qualify as really young people anymore. The youngest are in their mid-30s. But my daughter-in-law in Amherst is now an election worker. And she went out and said, I want to get involved in my town, and I'm going to go work. And I was in Amherst on election day. And I was talking to the moderator, and I said, is Chelsea Cook here? And he said, well, she was, but her shift is over. But she said, she's great. And we have a lot of these young people in Amherst. So they're doing something. And I think each moderator, each town clerk, each town meeting, everybody should try to get the young people there. I've never been to a town meeting. I've always lived in the city. Only time I've been to town meetings is when I was representing somebody. But if every opportunity people had, every time the Board of Mayor and Aldermen's on, there was some tracking line under saying, you can volunteer to be an election worker. People don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
It's not that hard.
Yeah.
And it's not like somebody's going to say, no, you
It's
can't.
just the long hours. It's not that hard to ask substantively. But
Well, I mean, it's
long
not that
hours.
hard to get involved.
Yeah, right. That's for sure.
I mean, it's not like it's
Yeah.
an exclusive club.
Yeah, that's
They're
right.
taking new members.
Yeah, they're taking new members and would love to have
Yeah.
more, I'm sure.
So I think one of the things we can say to folks watching
Yeah.
is if you know a young person who's looking to get involved in their community, it's a heck of a way to do it.
It's a great way to do it. It really is. Well, this is very heartening to hear because we have so much negativity about our elections. You hear it all the time. And is there a concern that it was expressed to your committee about the idea of some threats, to the system? I mean, we've had this dismal example of people showing up at drop boxes in military garb and taking down license plates. Is there any concern about
We
that
had a couple of instances
happening
where
in New
people,
Hampshire?
well, just in our committee, we had a couple of instances where people showed up and recorded our whole session because they thought we were doing something
Yeah.
nefarious. And one lady came and served me with a citizen complaint. I don't know what it was. I referred it to the Attorney General, said, here, you take care of this. But it was because I was violating my oath because I'd countenanced voting machines in New Hampshire or something.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Well,
Little cheap theater's not bad for the soul.
it's distressing that people have that view, though. And as I say earlier on, I caught a little bit of that in my duties at Ward 12 in the primary election, my first day on the job there. Well, Brad, this has been terrific, and I thank you for joining me on this. And
Well, it's a pleasure to be here as always.
Thank you so much for all you do for our state, in addition to all you do for your clients.
Well,
The
the message to people should be, our elections are secure, they're well run by your neighbors, your vote counts, but it doesn't count if you don't cast it.
Yeah. And I can only say amen to that, folks. Please, this is such an important election. We are hearing too much about elections not being fair and honest in this country. Even some people say that about our New Hampshire elections, which is absolutely baseless. So please go out and vote. We want to see you there. Election workers work very, very hard to assist everybody to get their vote cast. I mean, I've seen that time and time again. They just want to help you get your vote cast. And they're not going to try and make you change your vote. They're not going to try and influence your vote. There is absolutely no campaigning allowed in the voting place. No wearing of campaign buttons, no campaigning of any kind. And in New Hampshire, as in most of the country, the parties are entitled to have observers watch the count of the vote. They just have to be, give people enough room to do their job and count the votes. But there is, this idea that there's massive voter fraud is just bonkers. And the idea is, as you said, Brad, we don't have an election in this country. We have 50 elections in each of the states. And the idea that somebody could jigger the elections in all 50 states to affect the result of a national election is just bonkers. And so the idea that so many people are buying into this election was rigged and fraudulent, as espoused by our former president, number 45, it's just distressing, and it's putting a lot of stress on the whole system and on the people that are trying to make it work. And here in New Hampshire, as Brad has well laid out, we do about as good a job of making sure that's not the case as any other place in the nation. And so thank you, Brad, again for
Bob,
your service to the state.
Thank you for having me.
As the Ballot Law Commission, as the chairman of this commission, and I think this has been really great. Folks, next week when we come back, it'll be post-election, and we'll certainly be doing our analysis of that. But I hope that this program will encourage you to have confidence, and if you're not sure you want to vote, I hope it'll convince you you should vote. As Brad says, it's very easy to vote. A lot of times people come up with things about we should make, voting, all kinds of things to make voting easier. But it's easy in New Hampshire.
It's
I don't
very
think
easy.
I don't think there's any gimmick like that could improve the turnout because it's easy.
Well, people say it should be a holiday. Okay.
Okay.
But that's
But
it's above my pay grade.
Yeah, well, most people don't work from 6 to 7 p.m., so there's a time in there where you can get to the polls and vote. And so I just don't think that that's a big issue. We work very hard. And, one of the glories of our system, I think, and I think I probably have to credit Bill Gardner for this too, is you can register the same day you vote.
Right.
I mean, that is a really good thing.
Very
Very good.
Facilitates easy voting.
And, it's a little more requirement than it used to be, but it's pretty easy. And people are going to want to help you exercise that right, that fundamental right, guaranteed in our Constitution eventually. Not in the original Constitution, but eventually.
And if you want to know where to vote, go on the city website and it'll tell you.
Yep. A lot of people are willing to help you out and want to help you out. So thank you, Brad, again, and we'll be back next week with Mike Farley, and we'll do a post-election show, and we'll have lots to talk about. So take care. Bye.